I was sitting there on the swing of the cabin, and I was just having this moment where I was like, man, this sucks. There's nothing here. There's nothing going on. And Jeremiah, I swear to God, I couldn't make this up. Like, no sooner had I had that thought, and I actually had this thought where I was like, man, maybe I should not come out here as much and focus on other areas. Because I was thinking about maybe I should go out and focus on the refuge a little bit more. I swear to God, Jeremiah, as soon as I had that thought, I heard clear as day a knock behind the cabin.
What?
Up in the woods. And I was swinging, right? I'm on the swing, and I just hear that, and I just stopped. And I didn't hear another one. And then, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds later, an airplane went over.
All right, Bigfoot Society, you've got the privilege of talking to a gentleman from way up north, Mr. Beans Baxter from the magnificent state of Alaska. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm living the dream, Jeremiah. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, man, you must have some crazy dreams up there, too, dude. I can't imagine being up there. So we haven't had the privilege of meeting yet, Beans, but someday I hope to meet you in person. Big fan of your book. And we did talk, it seems like it was maybe a year or so ago, but you are actually an author. You've written several books. You've written Abandoned, The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska, which if you're into the Portlock case, if you know anything about that and you want to read an amazing book about it, Beans has literally written the book on it. So I'm going to have that link in the show notes. He's got another book, Squatch Cop, Investigating and Documenting the Bigfoot Phenomenon. And that is because Beans, he is a military and law enforcement veteran. We might talk about that later. He also has a brand new book that has just come out, Justice, Morale, and Other Fairy Tales, Alaskan Cop Stories. So if you're into like cool, weird stories from the life of a police officer, we all know interesting stuff happens. Beans has the book for you. So we'll have all of those three books linked in the show notes. But anything else that I need to throw in there, Beans, so people know what they're getting into with this interview?
Oh, I do a wee little podcast every once in a while called Sasquatch. It's all about Bigfoot in the great state of Alaska. I have a YouTube channel. Sometimes I post videos on there. I post a lot of videos from places I go and visit. There's a bunch of videos from the Area A cabin up there. Me hanging out with Rob Roy Menzies there, and a lot of fun stuff. If you want to try and get an idea of the lay of the land, there's some cool videos you can check out where I just walk around with my camera and just show everybody the terrain.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Definitely going to have all that linked in the show notes for sure. People love the Kenai Peninsula, I think. And there's so much Bigfoot things going on in that area. I had just released an episode a while back, episode 253 of Bigfoot Society. It was all about, I talked to a gentleman who is a trucker on the Kenai Peninsula, and he had a few sightings. And after I released that, Bean sent me a message on Facebook, and he was like, hey, just letting you know, I've already looked into that. And I was like, no way, really? I got to get you on so we can chat, dude. So, yeah, I would love to chat on that with you. But also, we're going to cover some other things because you are quite the Bigfoot investigator up there in the great state of Alaska. But Beans, so tell me, first off, how did you find out about this trucker story? There's a whole thing about how you found out about it. And then
it's funny because you released your episode and I'm listening to it. I don't get to, I regret to say I don't get to listen to every single episode because I listen to so many podcasts and not all of them are Bigfoot related.
I get it.
They build, and there's occasionally I just got to go through and I'll be like, I'm probably not going to listen to this one. I'm probably not going to listen to this one.
Yep.
Especially the Alaska themed Bigfoot ones I try and listen to. And I was listening to it and I was like, this sounds really familiar. I'm like, this sounds like super familiar. And so the longer the episode went on, I was like, I've heard this before. And it wasn't a report that was given to me, but I was like, I know I heard this before. So I go back and I'm like looking through some of my records and stuff. And I type in Summit Lake and I find this old report that I did. I think it was from 2018, I believe, is when I did a report. Yeah. And what had happened is Michael Thompson of the SasquatchTracker.com had contacted me. Me and Michael are probably as far as I know, the only like year-round residents that investigate Bigfoot in Alaska. I'm sure there are other enthusiasts and stuff up here, but he's a Sasquatch tracker and I'm a Lasquatch. And he had sent me this report and he left the gentleman's name out. I believe the gentleman in the podcast, his name was Tim, or that might have been a pseudonym. I never knew the witness's name, but he sends me this report and says, hey, this isn't too far from you. This gentleman had a sighting. He's a truck driver. If you get the opportunity, can you check it out? And like I said, I live in Homer, and this happened in around the Summit Lake area. So it's a couple hours away from me, but by Alaska terms, that's relatively close. Michael lives about 10 and a half hours away from me. Nothing in Alaska is close together. So I thought, yeah, I'll head up there and look around. And we knew the general area, but we didn't know the exact area. And when you're saying like, what could have been between mile marker, what did he say?
It's 41 to 47.
41 to 47. I think I have 41 to 48 in my report.
Okay.
That's 7 miles of... I can't get out and walk 7 miles and look for tracks in the snow. Right, especially not on a busy highway. So yeah, I headed up there during the day, drove those mile markers, drove back and forth for several hours, just looking. When I didn't have a vehicle behind me, I was crawling, looking for any places where something big might have crossed the road. Didn't really see anything. Did see a lot of people in that area recreating. So he mentioned there's a couple of big pullouts there in the area. Of course, I was there during the daytime. There were people skiing. There were people snowmobiling. I mentioned in my report, and I'd forgotten about this, so I went back and read my report, but I was driving down the road and I'm like looking up in the wood line and I see a figure like dart between two trees and I slam on my brakes and I'm looking and it's like a dude on skis, like skiing through the woods. So.
Cross country skiing. Yeah.
So that kind of gave me a start. But I think I remember I even mentioned in my report he was wearing like a yellow snowsuit or something. It was definitely a dude. But yeah, it was interesting because I got to go up there and check out the area. I was put off by the amount of people that were up there and were recreating. Like I said, though, I was there during the daytime. There's probably not a lot of people there at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
One of the other things that kind of struck me about the area is if there's this many people recreating in here, I would think that maybe we would get more reports out of here. There'd be some tracks or something. But again, if you're out doing winter recreation and you see some big tracks in the snow, you might think, well, that's snowshoe tracks or something like that. So most people don't have Bigfoot on the brain like I would or Michael Thompson would if we went out in the woods. So I could also see how maybe something like that wouldn't get reported or even noticed by people that were out doing winter recreation. Another interesting fact about this area that wasn't in your episode, Jeremiah, right around this area, there is a place called Devil's Creek Trail.
Oh, really?
And that's interesting because there's a lot of places with Devil's Lake, Devil's Creek, Devil's Trail, Skookum Lake, names like that. And they seem to be areas of, Bigfoot activity that occur in those areas. I told myself, I'm going to look into that and see if I can find out how that place got its name. And I forgot about it over the years and haven't went back and researched it. But there is a place called Devil's Creek in that vicinity.
That's really interesting. I'm going to have to look up. I bet you that's in Franzoni's book. He's got that great book that goes over all the like Bigfoot related names like all over the US. It's nuts. I'll put that in the show notes too as well. There was an interesting part of that interview I did with that trucker where he mentioned that I believe he went to a small diner or cafe and he was talking to an older gentleman, and they had mentioned that there was like a cabin that was in the woods outside of that same area, and they had stories there over the years that they'd seen Bigfoot around that cabin. Is that anything that had come up as well, or?
No, I haven't heard that. I did hear it in your episode.
Yeah.
I know the diner he's talking about there in Cooper Landing. In fact, in Cooper Landing, there's a little store called Wild Man's.
Ooh.
I've been in there and I asked the lady working, I was like, hey, is it why? And she said, no, it's like the nickname of the guy that owns the place or something. It's not, doesn't have anything to do with Bigfoot or Sasquatch or wild men or anything like that. Coincidentally, she did tell me that her sister had a sighting of Bigfoot in Kasilof, Alaska, which isn't too far from here.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that was a few years ago, probably back in, it was about the first time we went to Port Chatham, I think, in 2018. But
okay.
But yeah, there's a couple of places in Cooper Landing that are getting close to Cooper Landing that I've found tracks and had experiences myself.
Oh my goodness.
So it's that area. It's good. It would be good habitat. I think if they're around here, they're probably in that area and probably move through there pretty frequently. That area near Summit Lake, it's a pretty good amalgamation of a bunch of different, you've got really tall mountains and you've got thick forest, and then you've got a few like wide open flat areas. So there's a good mix of terrain in there and enough cover for them to stay hidden if they wanted to. Personally, I think probably with the amount of people that recreate in there, they probably don't live in that particular area year round, but they may certainly pass through there.
Can you explain to myself and listeners that are not Alaska based how big the Kenai Peninsula is, maybe using like lower 48 terms? Or
what is it?
Is it huge?
It's pretty big, but it's not, you can drive it in a couple of hours.
Okay. So it's doable.
It's, in fact, in Abandon, I have the exact measurements. I think it's how long, and it's something like 150 miles long, and I can't remember many miles across, but you've got Kenai, Soldotna, Seward, Homer, and then a couple of little towns peppered around. But other than that, there's not a lot of people living here. It's not very occupied. There's a lot of open space. The Kenai National Wildlife Refuge is here. That's several, I can't remember if it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acres. It's huge. So there's a lot going on here. And plus some of it, like for me to get to Seward's not, as the crow flies, Seward's not that far away from me, but I got to drive around the whole peninsula pretty much. I got to go up through Cooper Landing.
Oh my goodness.
Up to the Y, and then turn right to go south and go another. It's like, what is it? Is it 4 hours for me to get to Seward? Something like that.
Would you consider that peninsula a hot spot for Bigfoot? Like I hear there's so many things that are Bigfoot related that happen on that peninsula. Or is that kind of just par for the course in Alaska in general? Like you're going to have.
I wouldn't say it's a hot spot, but it definitely has hot spots on it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You've got Port Chatham, which has its history. You have the villages a little bit north of Port Chatham. You have Nanwalek, Port Graham. Those places is you almost always hear something going on there, some kind of Bigfoot story or sighting or something coming out of there. And some fairly recent ones too. But then you come to Homer, not a lot going on in Homer. There's not really any Bigfoot sightings around here. Homer's been here for a long time. I think it was officially I believe the police department was formed in 1964, something like that. But the town's been here much longer than that. And I think probably just the amount of people here, I guess they just know to stay away. It's a pretty well established town. It's been here for a while. Then you got Kenai Soldotna up the road. Not a lot of sightings coming out of those cities. But once you get out of them into the wildlife refuge, places like that, there's activity going on in there. I believe that's probably one of the hot spots. And then if you head over to Seward, not necessarily in Seward, but outside of Seward, outside around Area A, that place, just an hour or two outside of Seward by boat, still on the peninsula. A lot of stuff coming out of there. That's where Area A is. That's where Les Stroud had his, you heard the pant hooting or whatever. That actually wasn't very far from Area A at all. Stuff like that. So I wouldn't say, you can't throw a blanket over the Kenai Peninsula and say it's a hot spot, but there's definitely spots within the Kenai Peninsula that you could say those you would have a better chance of activity there than in other places.
Has there been a time, Beans, when you've been out in the woods and something just crazy has happened, Bigfoot related, and it's almost, man, check please, I don't know if I want to be here right now, or just anything that you're like, wow, this is intense?
I've had a few things happen to me that kind of creep me out. One day I was driving through the Kenai Refuge there, and I'm driving along. I'm driving real slow. It's pretty much just a one-lane gravel road, and I don't really have an agenda in mind. I'm watching the tree line more than I'm watching the road. I'm just trucking along, crawling along, and I see these two pretty large trees, cross to make it an X.
Okay.
And I stop and I look at them and I'm like, I want to go look at that, but I don't want to park right here because it's a one-lane road. But I knew there was a little pull out, a couple hundred yards up the road. So I said, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to pull over and I'll walk back and I want to check these X's out. And I wanted to see maybe if they were natural or maybe, but one of the things that I try to look for when I find something like that is, is it just two trees that have just crossed over? Like the one has a root system attached and the other one still has a root system attached. Or is it maybe one that's been pushed over and then another one that's brought in from somewhere else and placed there? That was what I was looking for to try and decide if it was natural or not. So I go park, get my backpack and stuff on, walk back down toward where I saw the X's, keep walking, looking, don't see them, and get to the point where I'm like, okay, I know I've gone too far. Turn back around, start walking back toward the truck, look, no X's. And I'm like, I should have thrown something out of the truck, X marks the spot or something. But I'm like, okay, how am I overlooking this? These were two giant trees that were making an X formation. How can I not see this? So I'm like, maybe it's because I'm several feet lower than I was a while ago. I was in my truck a while ago when I saw it. Let's recreate it. So I go back, get in my truck, drive back down to where I know I've gone too far, turn around, drive back through there, cannot find it again. Absolutely. I don't know what. I cannot explain it. I don't know where they went.
That's weird.
It wasn't like I just drove by and was like, oh, I'm going to go back. I stopped, rolled my window down, looked, didn't take a picture, should have. It's curse of Bigfoot. I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna walk out. I don't remember how far. It was less than 100 yards from the road. I'm gonna walk out there. I'm gonna look at those trees because I want to see if that looks natural or if it's something else. Go park the truck. I don't know how long it took me. I wasn't in a hurry. 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more. Came walking back and could not find it again. Didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, smell anything, but I just could not find those trees again to save my life.
Man, oh, that would mess with me for a while. I would be like, what is going on?
Same area, a little bit further down the road at a campsite. Me and my wife were in this campsite. It's the only campsite there. It's my favorite spot. It's right next to the lake. And we were tent camping. And this was back, like I didn't have my audio. This is why I bought an audio recorder. You go out, something happens, and you're like, oh, if only I had this piece of equipment. Then you go buy that piece of equipment, and it never happens again.
Exactly.
So it's like 3-4 o'clock in the morning. We're snoozing in the tent. I wake up to roll over or something, and I hear just this 3 or 4 times this like roar.
Whoa.
And it wasn't close to us. It was echoey. It was far away. It wasn't close to us enough that I was like scared or anything, but it was loud and I didn't recognize it. And I'm just laying there listening to it. And it does it like 3 times in a row or something like that. And I asked my wife, I didn't even wake her up. I didn't nudge her. I just said, did you hear that? And she goes, what was that? And I'm like, I don't know. She's born and raised here. I'm not, but I'm pretty familiar with the wildlife. And it certainly didn't sound like a bear. It didn't sound like any kind of, it was a roar / scream. And it was just the weirdest thing. And like I said, if I'd had a recorder, I probably would have captured it for sure, but I didn't at the time. I do now, but it was crazy. And like I said, she's born and raised here. She had no idea what it was. She's like, it sure didn't sound like a bear. Bears have a certain cadence to them, a tone. And this didn't really sound like that. This sounded like it was a cross between an animal and a person yelling. It was a real sound.
Ooh, man. Oh boy. That would, I have yet to hear vocalization. That's going to be quite the day when that happens. But man, that's probably your military and law enforcement background came into play to, that's a good question, actually. Have you found that having that type of background really helps you out as a Bigfoot researcher? Or?
I think it helps me to notice things maybe other people don't. A little bit better awareness of my surroundings, or I notice, oh, hey, look, there's a branch broken up here or something, and maybe a couple other people have walked under it or something. It helps in that regard. It helps with the handprint they found in Area A. We need somebody to swab this for us, and they called me out there to do it because I've actually done that in real life before with criminal cases. I've sent DNA to the crime lab for analysis, so I felt qualified to go out there and do it because I've done it in a real world scenario before.
Absolutely. Since we're on the topic of Area A, what do you think is going on out there? I mean, that's just the wildest place, that whole Alaskan coastal Sasquatch from Small Town Monsters, Alex Petikoff, those guys. That looks like a wild place, dude.
Yeah, I think Rob Roy and I were just out there. Oh, when was it? Was it last month?
Oh.
We've been out there this year. We went out there. It was our first trip out there this year. We got to run around a little bit, and we found some really interesting scat that we couldn't really identify. It's funny because I've got a video of when we found it, and I walk by and I look at it, and I'm like, "Hey, Rob Roy, come here and look at this." And he comes over and you can hear that it's awesome because I captured him seeing it for the first time, and he goes, "Oh, that looks human."
Oh.
And we get to looking at it, and it's not huge by any means, but it's definitely what you would expect to come out of probably a good sized person. And it has seeds in it. So it's probably not human, but it doesn't really look like any bear scat that I've ever seen. So I'll send you some pictures of it, but
yeah. Hey, I could put those up in the YouTube version.
Yeah, it was definitely some interesting scat. And we ended up collecting it because I've found scat before and not collected it, and I regretted it. So we went ahead and picked some up, and I'm still waiting to hear back from somebody on it. I can't tell you like what we found,
Gotcha.
but I have sent it to a few people. I had Amy Boo show it to her, or what do they call it? The zoo
Oh,
crew?
yeah.
The zoo book, Project Zoo Book. I had her show it to, and the general consensus with them that it was probably bear. And I don't know. Like I said, it doesn't look like any bear scat. I've stepped in a lot of bear scat. I've had it on me, and it certainly didn't look like any bear scat that I've seen. But I don't know what else it could have been. It didn't look like wolf scat or coyote scat or moose scat or deer scat or anything else that could have been in that area. And so it was some interesting looking stuff.
Have you ever heard anything out of the ordinary there, or experienced any weird stuff happening in Area A?
Yeah. We talk about Area A and all the stuff we've experienced there, and people that listen, they might think that it happens all the time. You get there and there's activity up to the time you leave. It's not really like that, because we don't talk about the times when we're sitting around on the porch, like drinking a Coke and nothing's going on. Mm-hmm. But there is quite a bit of stuff going on out there. One of the last times I was out there last year, I was sitting on the swing, and I'd actually been going out there quite a bit and hadn't really had anything happen. And I was actually getting a little discouraged. I was like, man, the place is beautiful. It's amazing. People pay a lot of money to go out there and spend time in places like this. But you know me, I want it all. I'm sitting out there. This sucks. Where are the Bigfoot at?
It's like Jurassic Park. When do we get to see the dinosaurs?
Exactly. I'm like in this beautiful Alaskan cabin with the mountains in the background and the sun shining. And I'm like, this sucks. And I was sitting there on the swing of the cabin, and I was just having this moment where I was like, man, this sucks. There's nothing here. There's nothing going on. And Jeremiah, I swear to God, I couldn't make this up. Like, no sooner had I had that thought, and I actually had this thought where I was like, man, maybe I should not come out here as much and focus on other areas. Because I was thinking about maybe I should go out and focus on the refuge a little bit more. I swear to God, Jeremiah, as soon as I had that thought, I heard clear as day a knock behind the cabin.
Whoa,
up in the woods. And I was swinging, right? I'm on the swing, and I just hear that, and I just stopped. And I didn't hear another one. And then, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds later, an airplane went over. Not a little plane, a big plane.
Okay.
And I was like, I wonder if it had something to do with the plane.
Yeah.
Anyway, I sat out on the porch like a little bit longer, and another plane went over. I didn't hear a knock. So I was like, I don't think that had anything to do with it. But then I'm like, did it have something to do with me? So I don't know. It was just a real weird kind of little coincidence. And I don't think it was meant to be a sign or anything, but I took it as maybe I'm not done with Area A. Maybe I'll keep heading out there.
Oh,
and like I said, I haven't been completely disappointed in a while out there. It seems like something happens every time I go out there. Maybe nothing major, but something happens. And like when me and Robert, we went out there, we found that scat. We had some really interesting audio recorded that night while we were sleeping.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think what's happened is maybe the novelty of the cabin being there's maybe worn off a little bit for them.
Sure.
I don't think if this makes any sense, I don't think they're as close to the cabin as they used to be. I think they used to spend a lot of time watching the cabin. I think maybe they don't do that anymore. And I know the owner cleared some alders out by the beach, and that seemed like there was a lot of activity in those alders, like rocks would come flying out of those alders. Oh. It seems like that doesn't really happen anymore. So I think maybe once they realize they're not going to bother us, I think they're still around. I just don't think they spend as much time focused on the cabin as they used to. I think realize that it's probably not a threat.
How long do you guys usually stay there when you go to visit?
Usually it depends, but usually 2 to 4 or 5 days. I think 5 days is probably the longest I've been out there.
Be interesting. I'm sure there's been, Scott has probably stayed there for an extended period of time, though, I would imagine.
He's told me what the longest amount of time he's been out there is. I don't remember what it is. I want to say it's something like 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
I know this year, I think there's going to be somebody out there pretty much all of June, including Alex and I, hopefully.
Yeah. Big things coming for sure. Big things coming. I had a good chat with Seth about that when he was on a few weeks ago. That was, oh man, STM is doing some cool stuff in Alaska in the future, sooner than people realize, for sure. We talked about the handprint a little bit, and that was really cool because I wasn't expecting you to be in that, and you came out of nowhere. It's like, oh man, I'm digging it. It's the Bean Show for a little bit. This is great. And it shows you do dusting the fingerprint, all that good stuff. Has there been any other info, or is that kind of a thing where we may see something from that in the future? We just have to hold on.
I think, and I don't have like official confirmation on this, so take this with a Bigfoot size grain of salt. I think that is probably going to be addressed in Legend Meets Science 2, maybe.
Ooh.
I don't know. We'll know, see. But I think that's where they're gonna handle that.
That's awesome. Which is being made now, and hey, even if it's not addressed, we're still getting robot baby Bigfoot, which is the best thing that's in Bigfooting for years. I think I want to have an actual robot baby Bigfoot. That would be great. Anyways,
I sent those swabs to Doug, so hopefully
Doug Hychek, yeah,
they're in good hands, and hopefully he does something with them soon.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure he will. Another thing that when a lot of people over, let's say the last year or so, if you say Alaska Bigfoot, they're gonna think of Portlock, right? You've spent a lot of time researching it. I would be really curious to hear it from your perspective. Would you be able to share like what the story of what happened at Portlock is, and then how you were involved of researching maybe what you found, things of that nature? So
Portlock was a little fishing village. It's in Port Chatham. So as you leave the harbor here and head out into Kachemak Bay and turn the corner into the real ocean, and then head down about 40 miles or so. When you get to the very tip of the peninsula, there's a little bay in there called Port Chatham. And inside Port Chatham is Portlock. A lot of people think that there was a town called Port Chatham and a town called Portlock. Port Chatham's the bay, and Portlock's the town. And I actually had that clarified by someone who lived in Portlock, who grew up there. So there's no confusion of that. I still hear people say that every once in a while, and I'm like, that's not accurate. And so it was just a little fishing village. It had a sawmill. It had the cannery. And what a lot of people don't really realize is back then they didn't have a lot of the regulations that they do now with fishing and stuff like that. And it wasn't really a free-for-all, but again, it was a little bit like the Wild West. And the sawmill built these like fish traps, and that's what they used for catching the salmon in. They put them like at the head of the bays and the creeks and stuff, and they would just swim into them. And they had the logging operation that fed the sawmill that made the traps, and then they were catching all the fish. So right there, you've got they were taking the trees and they were taking the fish. So that right there might be perceived as a potential threat, a resource threat to any Sasquatch that were living in the area. So you start hearing these stories. I think, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I believe right around 1908 or something like that was around the first time there was an entry in one of the cannery logs about the people didn't want to work because there was something in the forest that was like coming into town and bothering the people. And they actually hired some like Pinkerton like guards to like watch the town so the people would come in and work. I spoke with a gentleman whose grandmother actually worked in the cannery when she was a little girl. I think she said, or he told her, and he told me that she was like 8 years old or something like that. Said she was making 30 cents a day or something like that for working in the cannery. So they didn't have unions or child labor laws back then.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Imagine that, you wake up, you're 8 years old and you get woken up and you're like, all right, you're not going to go play today. You're going to go work in the cannery.
Oh, man.
And you're getting 30 cents a day. So the town, it was growing. It was bustling. They were having some good years with the fish. And then in the 1940s, you start hearing about things like it was 38, I believe, 1938. I believe you had a prospector go missing. Somebody came in, went up into the hills to look for gold. He turned up missing. You had the death of Andrew Camluck, who was out running a logging operation. They found him dead. They said that he was crushed with a piece of logging equipment that was too big for a man to lift or a person to lift. And they blamed this thing they called the Nantinaq, which is their version of a Bigfoot. And I mentioned this in the book, and it's pretty cool because, you hear Nantinaq means Bigfoot, and technically they say Nantinaq means a giant hairy thing or big hairy man. And then you also hear it doesn't really translate well, and there's no official like translation for it. And that's my favorite definition, is that one, is it just doesn't translate well, that we don't understand what it is. They give it a bunch of different abilities, like the Kushtaka and some of the other native lore creatures. They say it can shapeshift. They say it has red eyes. They say it comes when it's foggy. It can come on the mist. They give it some supernatural attributes. And it was a time when people were uncertain and they were scared. They weren't sure what was going on. And eventually by 1950, the town was abandoned and nobody lived there anymore. The postmaster, they said, was the last person to leave. Over time, the legend grew and got exacerbated. I know on the internet, I can't believe something got blown out of proportion.
This is weird, guys.
Yeah. It got turned into a Bigfoot massacre, which it wasn't. There was a series of strange and unfortunate events that they attributed to the Nantinaq that may have been responsible, but there were also some economic reasons and stuff that led up to the abandonment of the town. But you still have missing people. You still have unexplained deaths. You still have Bigfoot sightings there. There was a gentleman who said that he saw a Bigfoot walking along the beach. He said it was carrying a club. And the gentleman, he's passed away now. He had passed away before I read his account, but I would love to sit down with that gentleman and ask him, like, why did you say club and not stick or log? Like, why did you say he was carrying a club? But yeah, there's just a lot of Bigfoot lore, Nantinaq lore in that area. And honestly, it may have had something to do with the town being abandoned and people wanting to leave. But personally, I don't think it was the main reason. I think it might have been a contributing reason. A lot of times today, Jeremiah, is with like things, there's a lot of divisiveness. There's not a lot of maybe, okay, this person believes this and this person believes that. Maybe he has a good point and she has a good point. Maybe there's some truth to it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way or nothing.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people say, like, oh, there was no Bigfoot massacre. Then that whole story is bunk. And oh no, well, there's some good stuff in there. There's some good, scary, creepy stuff in the history of Port Chatham, but it wasn't the Bigfoot massacre that some people make it out to be.
Gotcha. Maybe not as killer as some people would say.
Like I was saying, though, you do have the resources being depleted. They were taking the trees. They were catching the fish. If there was like a perfect storm, to create an angry Bigfoot, or to create a avenging Batman Bigfoot, it would have been that time and probably that place, because I think it's a very good environment for them. Honestly, it's not a hop, skip, and a jump away from Area A, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility to believe that you could walk to Area A from there. It would take you a long time, but it could happen.
Oh, really?
And it's a lot of the same terrain. There are some like glaciers and stuff you'd probably have to cross over. I don't think it would be, I'm not going to say a human couldn't do it, but it would be very difficult, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. They're connected by land. It's just a lot of land in between them.
So there's a documentary that you had, I believe it was you with Stephen Major that had put together about the expedition to go out there as well. People can read your book, but they can also watch it on certain platforms as well. Did you notice anything once you actually got there in person and you set foot in the area? Was there anything that stepped out to you that you hadn't really made the connection before you'd been able to go there in person?
It was an amazing experience. It was one of those things that I wish I could go back and experience it again for the first time.
Yeah.
Just stepping off the boat and getting there and then just realizing how wild it is and how thick the forest is. We're walking through there, we're bushwhacking, and I'm thinking, like, how in the hell I couldn't imagine going there today and building a town. Like, it just, to me, it would just seem, and these people, they didn't have chainsaws, they didn't have heavy equipment, they didn't have four-wheeler, they didn't have anything that we would take over there with us to help make any kind of endeavor like that easy. And you got to think, these people are showing up probably with like axes and rope and just whatever they're building houses and they're clearing trees and they're just making this they're civilizing this place, putting a village here. And I can't imagine doing that today with today's technology, just what an undertaking that would be, just how thick it is and how unforgiving the terrain is. And that was one of the things that really struck me. It was just like, man, I can't believe this place was ever a town, just as wild as it is. And then we're walking along through there. And then we start finding structures, the few remaining like structures that are still there.
Yeah.
And then that was another sobering moment. Like, man, somebody lived here. This was somebody's like house. And that's crazy to think that somebody was probably born there and then moved away, and here it sits still today, and it survived the 1964 earthquake. It survived a few bigger earthquakes we've had since then, and it's just neat to see that. And then they have the machinery still there from the cannery. The cannery's all gone.
Okay.
But you can see some of the machinery, and it's interesting because we were walking along the beach, and we find this section of beach. It's kind of littered with like old rusty like equipment. And you're like, well, that's weird. How did that get here? It's just here on the beach. Then when you walk around and you walk up on the cliffs, above the beach there, you can see what's happening is the water, the ocean is eroding that cliff face, and that equipment is still up there on that cliff.
Oh, wow.
And that equipment that's on the beach has fallen through erosion. It's fallen off the cliff. And there's still some stuff up there. There's still some equipment up there. And we got some footage and some pictures of it. But eventually, like in another 50, 100 years, that stuff's probably going to be gone too, because it's just going to fall off into the ocean.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Listeners, if you're not aware of what we're talking about, you got to hit up some of the links I got in the show notes, and you got to check his book out and check out that documentary as well. It's a fascinating look at something you may have seen another way, and it'll be worth your time for sure.
And you know how there's people that kind of focus on an area of history, and they're like Civil War buffs, or they're like maritime, buffs or something like that. They focus on a specific era or a specific thing in history, traveling carnivals or something like that's their area.
Right.
There's a section of history buffs that you'll find, particularly around Alaska, Southeast Alaska, Washington, and scattered along the coast in Canada, that focus a lot on the history, the fishing and cannery history. And there was a lot of canneries that they would pop up and they would last for a year or two, and then they would go away, or they would move, or something would happen. And there's a lot of these like history buffs. That's what they focus on, is like cannery history.
Oh, weird.
And the thing is, though, there's almost no information about the Port Chatham cannery.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit, and you can look in it and find some stuff. I found some pretty cool property records when I was doing my research. I found a bill of sale. Somebody bought the pool hall for $1 or something.
Oh, nice.
And that was probably one of those, they won it in a card game and they had to do the bill of sale, but they had to put an amount on there. So they did $1. But yeah, there's not a lot of information out there about the cannery or the company. And from what I understand, when the cannery closed here, they moved down to Washington and opened up, I think it might even been called the Portlock Cannery down in Washington. They might still be around for all I know. But there's just like a gap in the history for when they were in Port Chatham. There's not a whole lot of information.
Very interesting. Is there anything right now that has you awake at night that's keeping you awake to do with Bigfoot that you're currently researching?
I think about that handprint a lot, and
I bet.
what the results of those swabs are going to be.
Yeah.
For those that haven't seen, I believe it's the Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch. I believe it's part 2.
It is part 2. Yeah.
Alex and his buddies are at the cabin out there at Area A, and Alex is walking. I think he's walking back to the cabin from being up in the woods behind the cabin. And just happens to see this handprint on the back of the cabin. And it was a good print. You could see dermal ridges. It was a good size. It wasn't huge. It was within the human range, but it was a big hand. It was bigger than my hand.
Oh, okay.
Which I have skinny little girly fingers, but it was bigger than my hand. I'm a pretty big guy. And so they took a lot of pictures of it, and they wanted to swab it. And they called me in to do the swabbing. And I went in and used some swabs that I like to use back in my police career. They're called capture swabs, and they have a little plastic tube at the top. So after you swab something, you can close the tube and the swab is protected. That way you don't have to worry about, like hitting something else with it. I collected a bunch of those and some off to Doug Highcheck, and we're awaiting the testing of those. And that's, I would say, if anything with Bigfoot keeps me awake at night, it's wondering what's going to come back with those. I know Dr. Meldrum is pretty convinced it's a human print. And like I said, it's certainly not beyond the the size of range for a human print, but it's really weird in the area it was at. And I just can't explain how it got there. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It was probably about, I don't remember the exact measurements, but it's like 5 or 6 feet off the ground. It's right underneath the bunk room window where they've had some stuff go on before. Did you know the story of the cooler?
Remind me.
So this room where they found, on the outside of the cabin where they found this handprint, that room, before the cabin was finished, it was framed up, and they were starting to wall it in, and it didn't have a front door. So they had like a little wood, like I don't know, some 2x4s or something. They had a little ramp going up into that room, and it didn't have a door. So at night when they go to sleep, they just put this piece of drywall. I don't know if it's drywall or plywood, but they put it up to close that off, and they'd slide this big Yeti cooler in front of it. And this is one of those big Yeti coolers.
Okay. Yeah.
Like you could put a body in it.
Oh, wow.
It takes 2 people to carry it. It's 4 foot or something.
Man.
It's a big cooler. It's an awesome cooler too. It keeps stuff cold for days. Anyway, they would slide that cooler up there, and it was full. I had like a bunch of meat and stuff in it for their meals for while they were. They didn't have electricity or anything out there yet. So they had that door sealed off with that piece of plywood. They had the cooler propping that piece of wood up there, and there's a couple of guys sleeping in that room. This one morning, it was like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Something outside the cabin pushes on that makeshift door. That cooler that probably weighs anywhere from between 40 and 60 pounds slides across the room and hits the wall on the other side. The makeshift door falls in, and people start yelling. The guys in the room, they start yelling, "Go away, bear! Go away, bear!" They can't see anything, but they're assuming it's a bear. And then as everybody's getting, Scott, actually, the owner of the cabin, actually comes running out of his bedroom with the shotgun. And he's got to run like around the cabin to get to that room. And he says as he's running around the cabin to get in there, he hears thump, thump, thump up the hill.
Oh, man.
So that room where that happened, that's the room where the handprint was found on the outside of the cabin.
That's awesome. That's a really cool additional story to know about that. Yeah, that's very cool. It'll be very interesting to see what info comes out in the future about that, hopefully. But I've got a left field question for you, Beans. I've talked to a few people about Alaska things over the last year. I had an episode where I talked to a gentleman. It was about Southeast Alaska. But I'm just curious. You've researched a lot on the Kenai Peninsula. Have you ever run into anything to do with four-toed Bigfoot?
No, haven't had any four-toed tracks or four-toed anything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Supposedly, if you do, you want to watch your back because they're the ultimate in aggressive Bigfoot. So watch out for sure. It was the stories that he was sharing. It was in Klawak on Southeast Alaska.
Oh, was that the Salvation Army guy?
Yeah. Alex, he's a cool dude. Yeah,
I heard that one.
He's a very nice guy. Man, I have a feeling that we might be seeing more of you in the future. And I hope you show up in some of the STM stuff. We'll see. But
yeah, well, I should be in some of the stuff they're going to do this trip coming up in June, because both Alex and myself are going to be speakers at the Boreal Bigfoot Expo June 10th and 11th. I don't know if this is coming out before or after that, but that's going to be in Fairbanks. And we're really looking, it's going to be the second one we've done. Dr. Meldrum's going to be there. Jonathan Redbird Dover from the Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah.
He's one of the Navajo Rangers.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to sitting down with him and telling cop stories. I think that's going to be fun.
Dude. Yeah. Oh, that would be a great episode if you could. Oh man, that's a podcast episode. I don't know.
We're going to be doing a live podcast from the expo. I haven't really decided what we're going to do it about. Because on one hand, I'm like, I could sit down and because I've got some Alaska Bigfoot questions I'd like to ask Dr. Meldrum.
Oh, for sure, man.
So I don't know what we're going to do, but they're going to be at some point. We're going to be recording a live podcast during the expo, and we're going to have a big speakers panel at the end. There's going to be a Canadian gentleman there. I'm not super familiar with him. Red Grossinger. Apparently, he's written a couple of books. I think he maybe he's a retired military gentleman. I believe he is from the Yukon, or maybe he lives in the Yukon now. Something like that.
Yep, I've heard this. Yeah. I've heard a little bit about him. Yep, that would be very interesting. I need to look more into him for sure. And
what's his name? Is it Subarctic Sasquatch? Fred Roll's going to be there.
That guy's cool, man.
Yeah,
he's an interesting guy.
Oh, geez, I know. And Rob Roy. I think this is Rob Roy's. I think this is his first appearance at a conference that he's going to be. He's going to be a speaker, and he's going to have a booth and be selling his Bigfoot art. But
man,
it's going to be an awesome get together.
That conference is the one. That's one of the ones to definitely go to this year, is what it sounds like for sure.
And Michael Thompson, the Sasquatch tracker, the one that forwarded me the report to Summit Lake there, he is going to be speaking, and he's going to be giving a track casting workshop.
Whoa, really?
Yeah,
dude, that's legit, man. Oh my goodness. Definitely going to have the info for that in the show notes. I'm pretty sure this will come out before then too, so people can check it. I'll make sure that it does. Since I'm a one-man thing, I can make that happen. Beans, it's been really fun chatting with you. This has been long overdue. I definitely hope to catch up with you again in the future, but can you take a few minutes and remind people how they can keep up to date with all the cool Alaska Bigfoot stuff that you're doing up there?
Oh, I have a website, alasquatchpodcast.com. You can go there. You can listen to the latest episode. There's links to my videos in there. I've got a little store where you can pick up my books. If you want autographed copies, that's where you need to pick them up or find me at a conference. I've got Abandoned the History of Horror at Port Chatham. I've got Squatch Cop, which is a how-to guide, how to collect evidence and document it. I felt like there was maybe a little bit of a gap in the Bigfoot community with stuff like that. There's a lot of good encounters and stories, but there's not a lot of good instruction manuals out there on how to do stuff like that. Like what happens when you go out in the woods and you do find something? What then?
Oh yeah, sure.
And my newest book, which just came out today, I actually just got my copies like 5 minutes before we jumped on here. Man. I have Justice Morale and Other Fairy Tales, Alaskan Cop Stories. There's like 50 stories in here, 50 short stories from my time in uniform. Some of them are funny. Some of them are just give you a little insight into what it's being like a cop in Alaska. And some of them are just a little weird. There's some stories that were passed on to me from other police officers that I just felt like, man, we need to carry this story on.
Right. I love that.
We've got to document this for prosperity's sake. So there's a couple of stories in there that I think are just classic stories that I wanted to keep out there and keep people talking about and entertained with. So that just came out. So it's not on my website yet, but it probably will be by Monday or Tuesday of this week.
Awesome.
So
very good.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been great chatting with you, Beans. And thank you so much for coming on, dude.
Thank you for having me, man. I love talking about Alaska and Bigfoot. It's my favorite two things.
you'd like to make a special one-time donation to Bigfoot Society, you can head on over to the Buy Me a Coffee page. I'd like to shout out Brian Corbin this week for buying 5 coffees, which will greatly help with our upcoming trip to Monster Fest in beautiful Canton, Ohio. His message says, "Can't wait to hear how Monster Fest goes." I'll be sharing that with the Patreon, of which Brian is also a member. Rock on, Brian. You're a great guy. The link for Buy Me a Coffee, along with everything else, is in the show notes. Thank you for listening tonight. Become a supporting member of the Bigfoot Society podcast by going to www.patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society and receive extra episodes and early ad-free episodes as well. If you've got a personal Bigfoot encounter you would like to submit for me to share on the podcast, please head on over to www.bigfootsocietypodcast.com. There you'll find the Share Your Bigfoot Encounter form a little lower on the page, and please take a minute to share as many details as you can. Please state if the encounter is anonymous or what name you would like associated with the encounter. And as always, thanks for listening.